Just looking at, we're just a few minutes past the hour. This is Luke Driscoll from CCS Fundraising. Joe Swimmer is also from the SEAP Network is on, as well as Wynn Lewis. Wynn's the rector at Christ and St. Luke's in Norfolk. I see the participant number scrolling up, which is exciting. So we'll let it build a little more. I said to Joe earlier that, you know, if we have more than 50, I usually should wear a blazer to kind of feel like we're back to normal. So I'm going to apologize in advance for just wearing a shirt here. All right, so we're up over 50. Why don't we, I think, out of respect for everybody's time, why don't we get started? Joe, do you want to just hop off and say a quick hello?
Great. Well, welcome everyone. And we are so grateful to have Luke and Wynn with us today to share about crisis communications and in this very moment, how we're handling the COVID-19 situation. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Luke and to Wynn and disappear from video and let them educate you all. Thanks so much for being with us.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And appreciate everybody taking some time today and hopefully talk about an important topic. I'm going to share my screen here and everybody can see this. Let's do this. We've almost gotten there until we can do this fluidly, right? All right. And let's go into presentation mode. There we go, a little better. So I'm joined here by my partner in crime, Wynn Lewis, who's the rector at Christ and St. Luke's in Norfolk, Virginia. And we're going to talk about kind of communications and really how, sort of in the era we've been in, how we can adapt, how we can engage people, and frankly, how we can thrive. So I think one of the lessons, if anything, we can learn about life experiences is, as we get to sort of the other side, what can we take with us kind of on our journey? And I think, if anything, we've learned for some communities who didn't really have a digital footprint or a digital community, they now do. And that's now going to be forever part of who they are. It may not be the primary part, but it will always be. And so I think some of those types of communications and just the thoughtfulness of how to engage people and the creativity, I'm hoping we'll see that as we go forward. Just a couple things in terms of our kind of objectives or concepts. Learn some things that can help us, particularly as we kind of get into the annual giving and stewardship time of the year. How we can sort of look at strengthening engagements in terms of communications with parishioners. Maybe what opportunities are there for new things. So for example, Wynn, has really been great in doing sort of a daily meditation, every day. And what's also kind of fun, you watch Wynn's in a new place. So sometimes he's downtown by the Battleship, Wisconsin. Sometimes he's out by the riverfront. So it's kind of fun not only to sort of enjoy Father Wynn, but see where he's at. And even crazy guy that he was wearing his Mets hat the other day. And as a Mets fan, I sort of have sympathy for him for being a fellow Mets fan. But I think the other things we can do is look where we can kind of deepen those personal connections with members and what strategies we can take forward. Here's the two of us looking dressed up and nice. And these both are dated photos from the two of us, as you can tell from our actual on the camera. I'll take us through a couple concepts in terms of where we are right now. So obviously, with all the things that are floating around, it's an election year, if nobody's noticed that. So we have that kind of floating about. From a climate change, even though that's kind of slid a little bit to sort of the back of our thoughts, the wildfires, for example, that are taking place in the West Coast, and as we're heading into hurricane season, remind us that very clearly we have communities that are being, impacted by that. And it's really something that's top of mind and needs to be top of mind. Thankfully, from a health point of view, we're navigating COVID, and we're getting to places where we're hearing about possible treatments, and that's exciting. From a market point of view, we've certainly had a lot of market uncertainty during the year, going up, going down. Obviously, different industries have been really negatively impacted in terms of unemployment. We hope to see some of those things are changing. The past several months have really raised the discussion level. Whether it's, you want to look at this in terms of a fortunate thing, in terms of people actively having those discussions, is good and positive. And, we would hope if we look back at this year, besides the negative impact that COVID had, that perhaps this would be another window of time where we've begun to take another step on that front in terms of, justice and treating each other fairly and carefully and thoughtfully. And this lastly is just sort of the unrest in terms of what's happening around the globe. So there's a lot of things that are floating around, and depending on who you're talking to, these are kind of, bigger touch points for them in terms of what's important to them or what's troubling them. So all this stuff, we have to think about this in terms of our communications. So when we did some research a few weeks back, we sort of looked at a number of the Episcopal dioceses around the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast, and just if we were sort of an end user, if we were a parishioner, if we hopped on sort of the parish website, what would we see? And so we saw some interesting trends, and we did some digging here, and we'll just share some of them with you. So for example, lovely rainbow color variety of things, but when we asked people, when we looked at this probably about 6 or 7 weeks ago, how many parishes were streaming services, across the board? Now, obviously some churches are missions and tinier, and they probably don't have the ability to do so. So they might be sort of piggybacking on to maybe a larger church, like Wynn's church is a larger church in downtown, but certainly in his diocese of Southern Virginia, there's some really tiny little churches and outposts that more than likely don't have that ability. So they probably are piggybacking off another. But it is interesting to see the different averages here, that you would, maybe if I asked you the question in an open-ended way, after several weeks, so if we got into perhaps June or July of all this, what would you see in terms of streaming services? Would you have guessed it would have been at this level, or would you have thought it would have been 90% or higher? So I think this is sort of an interesting sort of trend in terms of what we were seeing all across kind of the East Coast. In a similar way, then we dove a little deeper, and then we asked, we kind of looked at it and looked on the different websites and said, how many are actually, have an online presence? Do they have a website? And then there were, only 3 that had less than 80%. So most of them had that. But again, shows even some of the smaller churches, there's no reason why they shouldn't have some type of presence. And that's something that I think if the individual church doesn't tackle, it could be something that at the diocesan level, that there should be some digital front door for every single place. So I think that's an interesting finding that we saw. But then what's interesting, when we went on the websites themselves, only 21% on average mentioned giving on their website. Now, hopefully that maybe has changed over the past few weeks, but it wasn't front and center. Now, if we were to take off Christ in St. Luke's, the name off the front of the building, and we just said, here's a nonprofit that serves several hundred people in the Norfolk community. It also helps seniors, it helps children, does outreach. That nonprofit definitely would mention giving on their website, right? So that's an important thing to kind of sort of look at, is not enough people were highlighting that, or if they were burying it too deeply on the website. Another thing we looked at too, if you have a website, and we've all gone and been on websites before where we notice they can be really out of date. So when we looked at folks that had newsletters that were online, less than a third had something that was up to date. Maybe the highest was about 40%, and the lowest was maybe about 12%. So what that does is, if your website isn't reasonably dynamic, it makes people think I shouldn't go back and look there because it's not tended to, it's not taken care of. So I think that's one of the things is, if you look at, if you're providing communications, whether by mail or digitally, and frankly, in this day and age, you need to be doing both. You need to make sure you're keeping that updated. I mean, we all know we've been to the dentist's office and we find the magazine that's, 12 months or 18 months old. It's no different on the digital front. So we need to make sure that that's updated. A few places we saw they were outperforming, Diocese of Maryland and also North Carolina were kind of at the top end, but that's still less than 40%, which I think that's telling in terms of keeping that, online presence dynamic. When we looked at the actual newsletters or e-newsletters that we had, only 5% of them indicated giving in their newsletter. So reminding people not only to continue their giving, but in some cases, if they're able to, maybe they can consider giving more. So that was something we thought that was very, telling, was if we're having an opportunity to communicate with people, tell them what we're doing, why we're doing, even if it's in a passive way, there should be something very simple where we're talking about how they can support the church, how they can support Christ in St. Luke's. One of the simplest things, if you talk to planned giving people, is they will say in almost every different type of communication you have, where appropriate, if you have just the line, please remember Christ in St. Luke's in your estate and your plans. Just that simple line where they will say, you need to kind of do that in terms of repetition. When you plan giving, people will say, between how many touches does somebody need to have in terms of interactions before they make that planned gift? A lot of times when they track it, it's somewhere between 12 and 15 or more that they've gotten a planned giving newsletter, they've been invited to something. So again, it's so important to mention giving, support, and again, using that to illustrate impact. When we looked at the Facebook front, that was something. Win I see Win daily on Facebook, and so I enjoy seeing his mug there. But that's something a lot of folks have sort of adapted. So on average, we saw that that's been the platform I think most people have been familiar with and comfortable with in terms of having some type of presence, whether it's showing services, whether it's a daily message. And I think this is just like anything else. Once somebody is accountable and responsible for that, it then becomes another channel that you can communicate people with. We'll kind of move through this a little bit quickly. This was also interesting when we looked at the places that nearly 90% had some kind of Facebook users, only a quarter was mentioning giving on Facebook. So if you are communicating with people, and again, it can be something as simple as click here, please remember to support the church, here's a link. So that's something where you want to make sure that we're talking about giving and support, or even just thanking people for their giving that they've been doing already. And then I think that what we saw is the metro areas were a little bit better in sort of mentioning giving when we looked at sort of some common threads among them. What we'd like to do now is tuck into a little bit about Christ in St. Luke's in Norfolk. And I'm going to share a couple of slides here. But I'd love Win to kind of maybe you to talk a little bit about your experience there, maybe your time there. And what we'd like to do is to make this a discussion. So I hope to start to see the chat box start to light up as we get sort of some questions and comments from people. So here's a little kind of information slide about Christ in St. Luke's. But Win, why don't you tell us a little bit about
thank you, Luke. Christ in St. Luke's is in Norfolk, Virginia, Diocese of Southern Virginia. It is a very solid, I would say, larger program parish. Our annual budget is over $1 million, as you can see. Average annual pledge is about $3,500. Like a lot of churches, we probably our donors underrepresent the numbers, and we've been working on that over the years. But we have been successful in a capital campaign. We're literally on our third capital campaign since 2016 for what will involve transformation of our buildings, the addition of a preschool for music and the arts. And we just completed a $5 million renovation on our church, which, as you can see in the photograph, is a solid, nice Gothic revival from the early 20th century. It's a beautiful space. Part of the renovation included $1.5 million on our organ because our music program is quite solid here. We are in the oldest suburbs in Norfolk, about 3 minutes from downtown Norfolk.
Can you actually either sit back a little
Sure.
bit or tilt your webcam, because we're kind of only seeing the bottom part of your face. There we go.
Is that
Great.
better?
Yes.
Perfect. I can't see my face.
One of the two of us. I need you on camera.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Luke.
So, and the other thing in terms of some of the renovations, that happened, as you can see that is how close the water's edge is to the front door of the church. So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the improvements because of the water there.
Yeah, one of the issues that we have is we're really ground zero for sea level rise in Norfolk. We're in the midst of the Arts District. We have Opera House down the street, the Chrysler Museum on one end, and a kind of kitschy new arts district there called the Neon District. At the other end of the street that runs in front of the church, we have a large medical complex, and that includes a heart hospital, reproductive medicine, a general medical hospital, and a medical school. So we're halfway between two major arenas, and the city has been working with the Dutch on sea level rise and how to manage it. But we have had quite a bit of flooding in the lower floors. We had to abandon one of our ground floors in the renovation and move everything upward. So our whole focus in renovation is to utilize every space as potentially multi-purpose, rather than to spend a lot of money on building new buildings. We want our space to be efficient. We want to make sure that it is sustainable both financially in the future and also in terms of our carbon footprint. And so we're in the process now of beginning to put in a hydro geothermal HVAC, which we hope will make the church a lot less, or at least a lot more economical to run in the future when there may be less resources to do it. But we also are committed to environmental sustainability. And so that's another aspect that we want to take hold of.
So I think the other thing, just to kind of quick takeaway and look at, is at the bottom of the page. So here is a pretty good size, healthy parish that's in, a metro area, even though it's maybe a smaller metro area compared to some of the top 20 places. But it has a solid future, that, it has an endowment, its facilities have been fixed up. And so part of that giving is that sense of trust. So at the bottom, sort of after COVID hit, we sort of looked at it and kind of Wynn and I were, wondering, as we kind of got past the initial shock of what was going on in sort of March and April, like, how is the giving doing? And when we looked at it, the giving was not just the same, but in some cases, a few folks were doing more.
That's exactly right, Luke. One of the things that initially, the churches were closed in our diocese on the 12th of March. On the 13th of March, I remember it because it was Friday the 13th, we got together as a communication team because we knew that communication and becoming a church that was virtual was critical at this point. We didn't at that time have live streaming, but we did record parts of services such as the sermon or special musical events on a regular basis. So we looked at various ways of structuring the Sunday service and decided that rather than do live streaming at that point, that we would actually do a production. So we would record different parts in advance, and then they would be edited together. And part of this communication team was our music director, Kevin Kwan. We had my assistant for communication and administration, Emily Stewart. we had Will Lee, who is a member of the parish, but who is also a contractor who works with us in terms of our website and social media, and myself. The other three are 40 and under. I am over 60. And so between the four of us, we developed a means of utilizing the gifts of the parish, which include music. So we could put together productions with safely for those who are participating. And then every Friday evening and Saturday, we had a couple people working on editing it, all of them part of the parish, so that Sunday morning would be something that would be visually and musically engaging, as well as the essentials of the liturgy and preaching and scripture. That has received a lot of accolades on the part of parishioners, and I think that has been a critical piece to maintaining the giving throughout this time. We've also done education on online giving, so we've increased the numbers of people who are giving online. We also looked at other ways of engaging people. Luke, you mentioned the daily morning prayer. I've been doing daily morning prayer for myself for years, for decades. And so I decided to open it up. And that meant that I had to make it interesting to galvanize people's attention. So I started doing it in different places, morning prayer in the marketplace or by the water, or highlighting some of the historic buildings or areas around Norfolk. And I found that the morning prayers now have not a huge amount of views. I think the Dean of Canterbury, with his animal menagerie, gets quite a bit more, but 150 to 250 on average, and it has broken 300. So people are checking in, and people from outside the church as well as inside the church. The same is true of our Sunday services. We're getting a lot of visitors on our Sunday services. People come up to me, or they make appointments to chat and find out more about the Episcopal Church.
And when
go ahead.
Maybe share, I know we talked about the daily prayer, maybe share about, we talked about lots of different other kind of virtual opportunities. Maybe you could share a few others, just because I saw in the chat box, somebody had said, what are some of the other things you're doing?
Yeah, what we want to do is engage people in several ways throughout the week. So we have 2 to 3 to 4 musical presentations a week, which Kevin Kwan presents. Part of our annual musical programs are what is called Sacred Music in a Sacred Space, and that involves both our choir, our soloists, and also members of the Virginia Symphony and others, and the Symphony Chorus, the School for the Arts. And so what we've done then is to provide a number of musical opportunities. We have continued our capital fundraising, and that has involved having some parish town hall meetings virtually. I got the idea from SEEP early on from another webinar of doing a weekly coffee hour. Well, we've expanded that into what is called More Than a Building. How can we engage people when we can't be regathered in the worship space? And so More Than a Building has included my interviewing the heads of various ministries in the church, whether it be homeless, we have a community garden, we supply food, but also to have what we call hashtag CSL Connect. And every other week we throw out an idea where people can post on the Facebook page some of their associations with that idea, such as beauty or creativity, or nature was a very popular one. Pets were the most popular. And so ways people can find different means of engaging in the life of the church.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. We have tagged giving to a lot of these, and we also are. We've just started. We've strategized on how do younger people engage in communications in the life of the church, and so one of our younger members is putting together podcasts. He's interviewing short interviews of people looking at the whole nature of the church and how the Episcopal Church is attractive to younger people, both in terms of its liturgy and its perspectives. And so he is doing that. And we also, our Christian Ed coordinator does 2 Zoom presentations live for various age groups of children on Sunday morning. And then she does a separate recording that can be viewed and discussed by families, adults, and children. So we're trying to keep things moving and interested. We reshaped our webpage, and we're about to reshape our webpage again so that there's a central kind of switchboard for people to find all of these offerings and be able to click into them. And finally, we decided that we needed to invest in equipment to do live streaming, because one of the things that's happened is that live streaming is going to be here to stay. We've not regathered in the building yet. That will come in October. But we have put up 6 high-definition cameras, and we will begin to live stream starting when we've regathered in October. So there's a few of the little things that we've done with this wonderful group of younger people that tell me what to do every other week.
And I think the thing that what folks have learned, or hopefully they've learned by now, is, when you're doing some of these things, it's no different than putting on any other kind of, production.
Exactly.
So there are production values to this. So, for example, you may find live streaming the actual service in the space that you're in may not be as conducive versus doing something, a different time of day. So, for example, some churches, they have beautiful stained glass windows, or they have the beautiful natural light that comes in, which is fine for the human eye. It's fine to be in the space, but it doesn't translate well in terms of filming it. So there's different things you need to be thoughtful about that. So,
but also,
even if
Luke,
you did something that wasn't exactly at the normal worship time, but it was done in a way that people could see and hear it better, that's important too.
The other thing that we've done, and I do not take credit for this. This is part of Kevin Kwan and his team that have done this. But at certain times, when, for example, when the organ is playing a prelude, or during communion, we do bless the bread and the wine, but we don't show us receiving it, but there is a communion meditation. But also he's shown parts of the church and angles of the church visually that the average person would not see, up in the tower, for example, or a view from the rood beam, or a view from the organ chamber. So there's an opportunity for people artistically to engage the visual and the auditory at the same time.
We had a good question from Carol, who mentioned what kind of financial investment did you make to build your virtual presence? So in terms of, you talked about some equipment, but maybe also the website. What types of investments did you make?
Yeah, well, the website is part of a contract that we do. It's $750 a month with this person who runs a company that works with churches and other nonprofits in their social media and website presence. So he manages all of that, and we pay him a management and a design fee. Beyond that, we spent $50,000 on the cameras and that allow us to set things up so that when we are regathered, and we can also film with these cameras, that we can see every aspect of the church building, and that gives us a lot more flexibility. Hitherto, it's been fairly static. But now we can live stream and show all aspects of the church and move from camera to camera and move cameras as well in a 360. So beyond that, we really haven't invested much money.
Well,
We have reached out to the Virginia Symphony because they're out of work. And so we've wanted to offer them an opportunity to get work, and so we've invited them into the church. We've had instrumentalists and we've had members of the chorus as well as our own singers.
And that's one of the things that's also sort of unique about Christ in St. Luke's is the neighborhood that it in is, because it's an arts district. They're sort of known for their music and even ecumenical activities. There's lots of other churches in that same neighborhood, but you often will host kind of events and things. So it's important to sort of stay with what you're known for.
Yeah, we are a venue for the Virginia Arts Festival as well. And in our renovation, we added lighting that would allow for that. And so as a result of that, we've been able to continue to utilize their services and many of the talent to enhance our online presence in worship. But I would say, all that aside, the critical thing, I think, for us is not be afraid to try some new things, learn from our mistakes, and there have been plenty. I have learned as a digital immigrant to listen to the digital natives. I say now that my mentors used to be older than I, they're now younger than I.
And that kind of goes to the slide I just shared now, which is, what are these different challenges? How do we keep everybody together? And so we list some of the things here. Just curious in terms of the first one at the very top we mentioned in terms of calls to parishioners. How did that go in the early days of this in terms of you and others, the staff, reaching out to people?
Yeah, that was one of the first things we did, was make sure that everyone was reached. Some of our staff members, like our associate organist, reached out to the choir members. We had Zoom calls with the choir, for example. The clergy, we have a number of adjunct and retired clergy. And so we all started making phone calls. We made deliveries to parents with children. We also had a parishioner who had a wonderful idea. She volunteered personally to write a note, initially to every parishioner over 60. And then that was so successful that she wrote to every other parishioner. And so this idea of being in touch and staying in touch with people was critical, I think, initially as well. And also the parish town hall meeting in June, where we were able to talk about a number of areas of parish life. We didn't get a huge number. We got about 60 or 70 folks online, but it gave us an opportunity to manage people's expectations in the time ahead.
And I think that just kind of goes to, if we just kind of building off of that, I just went to the next slide where, as you have that, kind of digital presence, it's important to sort of talk about, what are the things that you can do, what lends themselves well to do that. So I think the town hall, I think the more important thing was the fact that we, I'm doing the royal we, the fact that you all offered to do it and to provide that venue. So it did two things. One, for the people who were, seeking knowledge and wanted to know what's happening, they had a place to go. And then also that was, on the website, you guys also then posted that so that people then, again, maybe they could go at their own time. get that information, but that goes to keeping things dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this communication team, again, the communication team did not cost any more. We just gathered some people. Every other week we meet. We look at every aspect of communication and engagement. We make changes, and we try to keep things moving and fluid as this strange period of time continues to develop and move onward. One of the things I did learn, though, in terms of communication is that during a time like this, when our government is so unstable, when we don't know what's up and what's down, people need certain things that they can hang on to, that are that they can count on. So we also factored that into the process as well. That hence morning prayer, very traditional morning, right to simple morning prayer, and just some other things where people can engage in beauty or what they love, and be focused on things that really matter and give their lives some structure.
Agreed. And so I think one of the positives that I think we've seen is the level of creativity, which has been, church is not always known for being creative. Now, most organizations aren't around for 2,000 years, so it definitely has some credit for lasting. But I think the innovation and creativity has been wonderful to see. Maybe just speak for a moment about that in terms of what you've seen and what you've enjoyed.
Well, I just enjoy listening to the creativity from our staff and from our parishioners. My job, I think, more than anything else, is not to be the source of ideas, although I might throw a few out, but to be the chief booster for people of creativity, and we're very blessed with creative people here. So again, the spirit of experimentation, of permission giving, of allowing people to come up with ideas and support them as they move through those ideas. One of the examples was a community garden that a member of our parish started a little over a year ago, that has been so important through the summer in providing fresh vegetables for our homeless and working poor population here in the area. That was her idea, and we supported her. She's done a beautiful job with that. Great. So a lot of it is not saying no, but saying yes. Give it a try. If it doesn't work out, then there's no shame in that. We just learn from that experience and grow and do it better.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that we saw, and just would be curious for folks, to add into the chat, if they've had some, things that have worked well, or things that you thought were beneficial. Here's a couple of questions, Wynn, that we had that popped up that I kind of just want to catch up on things.
Sure.
So Jim talks about, is singing inside the building allowed in the diocese? If not, how have you handled choir? Now, I know maybe you can talk a little bit about what the plan is in terms of going back for services in your diocese in Southern Virginia.
Obviously our choir has not been able to sing, except for one experience of putting together the choir as a virtual choir. That takes a tremendous amount of work, and some of that had to be sent out for the final editing, but it was very satisfying for the choir. But we've been checking in with the choir regularly. The choir, our adult choir, we also have a chorister program. I think we are going to bring back the choristers in some form or other, since many of them are back at school, and Kevin and Marge, our music directors, are working on that. But generally we've used soloists, 1, 2, 3. Before the full shutdown, Kevin had recorded the symphony brass for Easter, so that had already been recorded before everything shut down, and we were able to use that for Easter Sunday. But the plan, the bishop has set some parameters. Each of us have to send our plan to her for approval. We are in the process of doing that. So in many respects, we're a little bit lagging behind a lot of churches in terms of our regathering, because there's been such a high satisfaction with what we've been able to produce virtually at this point. But we will be going back in October, God willing.
And Andrew had a good question, kind of circling back to some of those initial things we're doing. For example, like the calling ministry.
Mm-hmm.
He had asked sort of, how has that changed, or are you and the staff or you and volunteers still doing that?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Great.
And we've got a couple of retired clergy who don't get out much. They're careful about isolating, and so their ministry is calling. They call and check in with people, and then we all get together virtually to talk about pastoral care. We have a congregational care committee that looks at things such as meal deliveries and transportation and those kinds of things. Obviously, transportation is not being done, but we're looking at what people need. We have a group of people who are willing to shop for people who are ill or have COVID. And we even had someone from Massachusetts who was working here and got COVID. And so we would drop meals off and groceries off for him during that period. So we're continuing that process of caring for the parish as much as possible.
And I think I would just share with everybody that they talk so much about in not just fundraising, but in other walks of life, how important storytelling is. So I think, the idea is that we as church communities should always be looking for opportunities to reach out. So I think sometimes, as communities, we don't always think about telling our own stories. So just even when you just shared the story about somebody who was, normally lives in Massachusetts, was down here for work, and all of a sudden we all can relate to that if we've been on the road one time or another, how not just lonely that can be, but even more so if you've ever been on the road and sick. It's scary actually to be like that. Yeah. So the fact that people are reaching out, I think the important thing is to share these stories, find venues to share them, because I think that's the thing that challenges all of us. What can we all can do something, and maybe we can do more than we're doing. So I think you never know what thing is going to motivate and inspire somebody to get involved. Andrew,
well said, Luke.
Andrew also had a good thing. This is always the thing. Hey, what didn't work, and what did you learn, and what did how did you kind of grow from that? So I think we've learned a lot of things that didn't work during this process.
There's a lot of things that didn't work. There's a lot of things that didn't work. I think we had to try various forms of communication. We had some things worked, some things didn't work. The thing that was most helpful to us is that we kind of talked through a number of things, and out of that felt that the wisdom was in the group, and so we reached out to the community and solicited their thoughts. We thought we would get a clearer picture about regathering by doing a survey of the parish, and it was just all over the map. So we couldn't really get a sense of the parish as far as regathering. So we had to. I formed a regathering panel of people, which included 2 medical professionals, and they've been guiding us and me as we think about regathering in the church. I think the one thing that has not worked as well, we're going to try it again, has been we tried to continue our adult education. The bishop was supposed to have been here on Easter Eve for confirmation and reception. Obviously, that shut down. We had an Episcopal 101 class going, an inquirer's class, but we couldn't continue that process. People were zoomed out, people were overwhelmed. So we let it be, and we've introduced some programs, educational programs on a one-shot basis. For example, we did one on Black Lives Matter and the whole result of George Floyd. We did one on the environment, but we didn't get many takers for that. So we're going to try something again. I'm going to reinstate the inquirer's class online on Sunday afternoons at 5. We're going to start some speakers series, since we can pull people in from other areas. That's going to start in October, but we're also cognizant that and we have to respect that people are just tired, and it's very hard on parents. We're just trying to find ways of loving on parents and families during this time. I would say that our virtual Sunday morning Sunday school doesn't have a lot of takers, because that's the last thing I think parents want to do on a Sunday morning right now, is to get their kids in front of yet another Zoom event. So we're learning from all of that and exploring that.
Yeah, and both Emily and Jim had comments, and Jim said earlier before you started talking, don't just punt on what didn't work. I want to know what didn't work. Tell me more about, what didn't work and how'd you fix it? And I think you addressed that. And I think, as you talked about, for example, for parents, sometimes you have to sort of think about what's the objective. So let's, think creatively. So you'd say, all right, normally it's about bringing children and educating them and doing that in a way that's resonating
Exactly.
with them. So it might be something where in lieu of saying, get the kid in front of another screen again, maybe it's an activity so if you make it relate to some of your other programs, so maybe it's saying to parents, try this weekend, take a moment to go spend a half an hour and go and give them activities. So you could say, maybe you're going down to the water's edge and you can talk about why it's important for us to understand nature and respect it, and why, God gives us all these things. So we have to understand it's our job to take care of it. And that's a simple thing, a lesson somebody can learn, a child can learn. So it might be, again, activities that get us away from the screens, but still accomplish the same goal.
Exactly. And that was, I think, a real moment of awareness when we said, okay, it's not delivering programs so much for children right now. It's empowering families and just loving them and giving them ways in which they can engage the faith, or just doing something nice for them.
True. And we had a couple other things. Emily talked about how one of the things that they've done is every other month they were doing a mailing that had some kind of little personal touch. So one thing was they sent a packet of seeds and talked about kind of coming from a dark place, believing it will bloom.
Brilliant.
Mailing a prayer card. So things that were inexpensive, but again, the thought was welcomed.
Yeah.
So I think these are things that are good ways to, again, it's hard to sort of measure from a metrics point of view, what that did. But I think these are some, and it also should be coordinated. So, you need to think about, if we're going to do some mailings, let's plan them out a little bit. So what will we do? Kim also talked about when making that, she said she understands the investment that you made, but do you think there's going to be new and ongoing costs in terms of kind of to accommodate those productions? So for when we get back to in-person mass, will there be, for example, another communications person charged with almost being the director, I guess, of things, in terms of the video piece of it. So you're curious, are there going to be some new things in addition to the old?
That's a very good question. And I suspect that it's a question of reshaping staff. That has been some of the conversation, at least I know on one SEEP webinar that I attended, where we have to rethink how we staff right now. The job that our Emily, our assistant for communications and administration, she has a very, very different job than her predecessor had, because we're moving much more into reaching out beyond the church walls rather than waiting for people to come into the church walls. What happens in the church walls will still be important, but I think we're discovering that communication is multidimensional and that we have to stay on top of that. So it may not necessarily be more staff, it may be how we utilize staff, and also the whole aspect of outsourcing, such as how more and more, and that's something else I learned at a SEEP conference, was the fact that we might have a leaner staff but outsource more of our needs and our work. And I think that's going to be particularly true as we regather and get to the other side of this pandemic.
And I think that's like all things in life. You want to look to others who do it well already.
Yes.
And sometimes we can't quite emulate the way somebody else is doing something because, as you mentioned, like maybe you don't have the resource to make that kind of investment in technology. But if you're either at a smaller country parish or things like that, it might be something where you can piggyback off of a bigger parish's what they're offering. So there's ways to be kind of creative and thoughtful about it. And I think one of the things that we've also seen is in terms of sometimes churches and parishes get into the habit of sort of operating Monday through Wednesday, or Monday through Friday rather, and really it's about Sunday. And so I think sometimes what I've seen in being a fundraiser over the years, and I kind of have a unique aspect sort of working behind the curtain and working with the Father Wins and the staff of the world, is sometimes they can get in the habit of doing that where they don't stop and think about everything should radiate from Sunday outward, not the minutia of life of Monday through Friday. So I think, Wynn, to your point, it might be more about thinking maybe we need to be more flexible with the hours that we provide, but if the idea is maybe if we're thinking about things that are happening on Sunday, that then automatically then spills forward into the week in terms of what to do and how to engage people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say one of the positive things that have come out of this have been these wonderful SEEP webinars. I've learned so much from those. Certainly talking with people like you, Luke, and also our bishop, Bishop Haynes, does a clergy open office hour every week, and that discussion with her and with other clergy has been incredibly helpful. And again, I'm not the originator of ideas. There's no idea that is good idea that's not worth stealing. And so, right. But also it's been a place of reality testing, because sometimes I'm thinking of something, or we're thinking of something, someone else has tried it and it's either worked or it hasn't worked, or might have a different way of looking at it.
Absolutely. And I want to be conscious of the hour. If anything, we always want to manage people's time together. We have a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Maud brought up a good question in terms of what communications do you think are better sent by mail than electronically? Mm-hmm. I do think, like anything else, if you want to, you have the opportunity to send something longer or more detailed by mail. And certainly, if the population will tend to skew older at most parishes, folks are okay with mail, and they're okay with also having something in there. So we mentioned earlier, I think Emily or somebody else had mentioned they'd sent something that had a message or a prayer card or something. So I think in terms of communications, you have the luxury of maybe having more information in a mailing than digitally. Digitally, it needs to be fairly succinct, and there could be an opportunity to click and look at more. So I think that's important. There's a great book that we can learn things from our Catholic friends too, but it's called Rebuilt, and Father Michael White, who is the pastor there, and some of you may have seen him at conferences. He was an interesting guy in that he had his job was he was the secretary for many years of the Archbishop. So here it is. He was the top guy's right-hand man, and normally the people who have that job afterwards, they get sort of a plum assignment. Michael it would end up being my parish, but Michael got assigned to this parish that was really nondescript. It was one of those churches that was built in the kind of 70s. It was a big box that was supposed to just be a parish hall, and then they'd build a church later. Well, they never built the church. So Michael talks about, somebody talked about what didn't work. We heard that question earlier. Tell us about what didn't work. So his book is really about trying things that didn't work. And so I think it speaks to all of us in terms of maybe our concerns or frustrations. It's a nice, tight little book called Rebuilt, but it talks about just that. Like, how do you make it so everything you get to a point, it is about the worship, and it's about living the kind of the message of God through the rest of the week, not just kind of getting to the week and then having poor liturgy, poor music. You have your time to shine, don't phone it in.
Well, another way of putting that is, where are we going to focus our energies? And I think that everything does converge and emerge from Sunday mornings, and not to expend your energies on things that don't contribute to that.
Absolutely. And so what we'll do is we'll wrap up here, and we'll also try to make sure we'll provide the slides for everybody. And in terms of sort of, I think, things that when we look at, things that we've learned or takeaways, there's sort of a couple things that I think we can look at is, one, do embrace technology. If you won't always get it right, but do it. Promise, like all things in life, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. You need to over communicate. So you need to sort of make sure that you're communicating more than the minimum, and you're doing it in a way that resonates with people. And you also want to innovate. You want to think about, okay, what can we do with either, sort of innovating and sort of mother intervention. So what do we need to do to reach out to different groups? So it might mean you need to do it to a couple of different channels, through a couple of different people. Yeah. I think all those things, I think, will get you to where you need to go. And I think this has been really, really helpful. Any other following thoughts from you?
No, I think it's all been said. The only other thing I would say is don't be afraid to jump in and try things and learn from them again, experiment and have fun with it. There's so much pain right now, but it's also okay to try some things, and it is an opportunity to try some new things right now.
Absolutely. So I want to thank everybody, and what I would only just sort of, as the fundraiser in the room, just encourage you to keep giving people opportunities to support the congregation. People will ask you, what can I do to help? And that phrase in fundraising, I need your help, is simple, but one of the most powerful things. So if you're struggling with something, whether it's budgets, staffing, renovations that need to be done, bills, whatever it would be, don't sort of keep those to yourselves. So remember the same things we do in counseling. Don't keep them to yourselves. Share with others what you need, and more than likely, people will come forward to help you get what needs to be done. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Wynn. I want to thank
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
my good friend Joe Schwimmer from the SEEP Network, and everybody for participating. And as Joe said in the chat, all this will be available, the slides and the recording as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.